Rashford pulls up for three. Boom! Knocks it down.
Curry from the corner at three. Puts it in.
For overtime, makes it. Garrett, right.
Hi there and welcome to the MVP cast from me, Mark Woods. Thank you so much as always for joining us. Don't forget, if you want to follow us on a daily basis on social media, you can just search for MVP 24/7 on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. So let's talk numbers, let's talk stats. One of my favourite things when I'm prepping for a comment, you're just trying to find out a little bit more beyond the eye test of a game. There's an expert in this country. We like to call him the son of the late, great John Atkinson. He is the man who crunches numbers on a daily basis. He's got one of the very best websites. If you don't follow it, you absolutely should. It's daveowenbasketball.co.uk. He is the number man. Dave Owen, welcome to the MVP cast.
Thank you very much. That's quite the intro.
Thank you. I love your site, and it's absolutely invaluable to me, as I said, when I'm prepping or just trying to find out more. A little bit brass tacks here. You're a basketball fan, like we all are. Not all of us sort of basically create this gargantuan, I don't know what it is, an Excel sheet or database or whatever, just for the hell of it. Where did this interest come from?
I think I just saw. I was always an NBA fan, and I felt like as an NBA fan, access to information, stats, analysis, it's all just there at your fingertips. Even if you're a casual fan, you can just come in and kind of get involved and see all that stuff. And then when I came into British basketball, I wanted that. I wanted to know who's the best. That's what it kind of boils down to when you're looking at stats. You want to be able to kind of do some analysis. If you're a geek, you want to do this kind of analysis to see who's the best and get a view on that. And I felt like with British basketball, you just couldn't get access to the information to do that. And also felt that in terms of coverage and content, it was very much focused on the American imports because, they're the stars of the leagues. They're the guys putting up the numbers. So I wanted to create this platform that made access to information really, really easy in terms of always having up-to-date stats, very easy to use. Whether you're a stats geek or someone who's sort of fairly new to the game, just make it understandable, make it accessible, and then obviously have the focus on the homegrown players, the players that sort of I have that affinity to as British players that I felt like were sometimes, a little bit overlooked, particularly in the sort of the BBL where you've got the 5 imports, dual nationals taking up spots as well. So, yeah, I think I wanted to focus on the stats, but then to really narrow that down to the homegrown players as well.
Because your database now, the number keeps changing. What's the number of players that you've got in there as of right now?
That's a good question. Let's see if it'll tell me right now. Just under 1,500 homegrown players that are currently active this season. And then on top of that, you've got all the kind of players from the past. So that's... it's 1,500 in total, I think, that have active profiles.
And those stats and the career files, you've got the current national team, overseas players, US colleges, obviously the BBL, WBBL, NBL, WNBL, junior players. How easy is it? For those who have got mathematical brains, how easy is it to get these random stats from there's some leagues which you can just download freely, like the NBA. There's other ones which are a little bit more basic. How complex is this science of pulling all these things together from different sources, and at the end of it having this one formulaic database that covers everyone in the same manner?
Yeah, it's very challenging in terms of time management. Obviously, this is entirely a free time project for me, so I've tried to get a lot smarter and a lot more efficient as I've gone forward. With the domestic leagues, you have the advantage of you can go to one web page and you have all the players listed and all their stats. So that's a pretty easy copy and paste with a little bit of reformatting. The problem lies with the overseas players and the college players because you can't go to one page that has all the British players playing in NCAA. That simply doesn't exist. So you have to individually look up every single player and copy and paste their stats. So I'm working towards an automation of that. So that will save me a boatload of time. But I did it this Christmas while I had time off from work, because that's the only time I can do it, and went through all the college players and did a mass update. So yeah, it's one of those things that the domestic stats I can keep up to date week to week, because it's a fairly quick process. But I always feel kind of bad that with college and overseas players, I can only do sort of periodic updates as and when I have a little bit more free time than usual, basically.
How many hours? Quantify this. Average week outside, school holidays, as I would call them. Many hours a week do you spend on this?
I'd say overall, in terms of everything related to Dave Owen basketball, it's a good 20 hours a week that I put in, on top of a 40-hour-a-week job. So it's a lot.
When was the last time you went to the pub?
You know what, I'd have to say the last couple of years I've really focused on getting the balance right and really looking after my well-being, so I've made some real strides on that on a personal level.
Let's talk about stats, because things have really changed. I'm sounding old here, which I am increasingly, but there's such change. But what used to be, you got your basic stat, you got your points, you got your rebounds, you're lucky you got assists, and that was about it. And then we had this explosion about 15 years ago, particularly with the NBA. And I remember going to explanatory seminars that the league would put on, usually when we're at All-Star Weekend, where they would talk us through advanced stats. And, and you start to learn about, the concepts of offensive rating, defensive rating, clever ways of assessing field goal, true shooting, all those kind of things which you can delve into. And the fascination in that is sometimes that you don't actually even sometimes have to see the player to really get an understanding of what they do, what their strengths and their weaknesses. And a big part of this, I think, for you has been to provide that kind of analysis and insight for British basketballers.
Yeah, that's certainly what I've tried to sort of recreate, that NBA level of information and analysis, and trying to apply it to British basketball as much as possible. Because I just think it creates more conversation. We need those kind of narratives and sort of talking heads and podcasts, talking about the game. And the more information we have and the more analysis we have, the more it creates that conversation, and you get the debates about, I think when we're talking about advanced stats, obviously the one that most people have become familiar with is efficiency, which is a really nice, simple one number summary of all the other numbers. So we're not talking about, well, is 11 points and 8 rebounds better than 12 points and 7 rebounds, and getting into that sort of level of almost pointless conversation. The efficiency stat is effective in what it does. There's a couple of flaws with it, but I think people understand what that means, and it takes away that sort of 20-point scorer on a team that's losing, and he's just taking a whole lot of shots because someone on his team has to, and the offense isn't very efficient. And it takes into account all of those things. Where I've gone with efficiency is to the next level with that, because I'd always hear these sort of NBA debate shows where they'd be talking about two MVP candidates, say, and well, this guy's got better efficiency than this guy. But that guy's on a winning team and he's not, and they go back and forth on this. And I was like, well, there's surely a bit of maths that you could do to factor in the win percentage of the team and adjust the efficiency in accordance with that. So that's what I developed, just to kind of solve that argument, because I don't think that the guy on the winning team should just default to MVP. If it's, I think Russell Westbrook won it one year because he triple doubled even though he's on like a 500 team. I think if your individual performance still exceeds statistically the other guy, once you factored in the win percentage, then that's your guy, I think. And it's just trying to put everyone on a kind of even scale, I think, is what I've always aimed to do.
How tricky is that? We'll talk about the pros in a minute, but you're at junior level, and we've got slightly differing junior competitions, or even under 16. You've got maybe someone like a Quinn Ellis who was playing at an underage level in Italy at under 16. You've got players who are playing in the EABL in England. You've got some of the Scottish juniors in some contexts. You've got the players that have gone to high school in the US. That at that sort of level, obviously the playing time can be different because coaches are developing players. It might not, most of the time it is about winning, but there might be a little bit of variation in terms of giving players time to develop. What's the trick there? Because that's, for a lot of talent scouts, college recruiters or pro recruiters, they're looking at your website and they're going, well, is this guy better than that guy? And they're playing in two different places. What's the key there to having that objectivity when it's junior level but in different places?
Yeah, so that's the sort of next evolution of my statistical analysis that is starting to come to fruition now in this kind of early stages of sort of coming into a way I can actually use it now and start to put stuff out there. So once you've kind of looked at efficiency, taking into account the win percentage of the team, the next stage for me was, okay, well, how do I compare people, as you say, at different levels? So I've got every competition, be it professional, college, junior, in the world placed into sort of tiers in terms of the standard of play at those levels. So this sort of Dave Owen basketball score, if you like, that takes into account everything. It's taken into account your individual efficiency. It's taken into account your team's win percentage. It's taken into account the level, the tier that you play within. And then it's also going to take into account your age. So an 18-year-old playing in an under-19 competition is not the same as a 16-year-old playing in an under-19 competition. We wouldn't expect them to perform at the same level because you're playing 2 years young. So that 16-year-old will get a sort of boost to his score because he's playing 2 years young in the competition, in the same way that a 21-year-old playing in the BBL would get an adjustment, because for me at the senior pro level, we're not really expecting to see you perform at your sort of true potential level until post 25.
Is that the same when you go further up the scale, and for players that are mature? How do you get that intel that might compare, I don't know, a BBL, which is is improving against Italy D2, or as it used to be France Division 3, but it's probably now Division 2s or Pro Bs is the scale, or somewhere esoteric when Ryan Richards pops up in his latest country that in a league that none of us are really aware of. What's your sort of source material there to go, well, that league's a 10, that's a 7, that's a 5, or whatever way you want to grade it?
Yeah, so obviously this is the aspect of the objectivity that is in fact subjective, because of course you can't have a definitive answer to this, and I'm certainly not in a position as someone who's never played professional basketball or coached professional basketball to have a credible opinion on this. So it's essentially a whole lot of consultation, and then from talking to a bunch of different people and taking into account all of their sort of arguments for and against, having as much of a consensus as I can from trusted people that I know have got credible opinions on it.
This kind of stems from a conversation I had with someone about the BBL who was writing about it and was asking my opinion on it. But as the score or whatever you give against the BBL changed in the 4 or 5 years that you've been doing this?
Yeah, I believe it's moved up a tier. I think if I'd done this, but certainly when I first got involved in British basketball, which was sort of 2014, 2015 season, I think it certainly would have been in the tier below where I've got it placed now. And I think probably pretty recently has made that jump. I think I'd say probably only since maybe last season. This season it seems to be a significant jump. And you're looking at things like the quality of the imports and stuff like that. Where are the players coming from that are playing in the league? Where do they go after our league? It's a lot of the migration sort of tells you the key, but then you've also got to look at the role within that, which is the other factor that we'll come to when we talk about the ratings and how we get from score to rating. Because
I remember FIBA for a long time produced a migration report each year, and it was a bit of a as you said, it's a bit of a sort of world map of who's gone where and who's switching to which league. In within Europe now, it used to be quite, the BBL, but it was unfavourable. You'd be compared to Luxembourg or some of the smaller leagues. What's your nearest level in the sort of banding of leagues in Europe for our league?
Yeah, so some of the leagues that sit in the what I call the Pro Plus tier would be sort of second division Germany, second division Italy, second division Spain, first division Holland. Those kind of leagues we consider comparable to the BBL. Which
is quite a leap if you're taking a second division Spain. I mean, that's for a long while was probably the second or third best league in Europe.
Yeah, there's 21 leagues in the same tier as the BBL, and obviously the ones towards the top of that group, are almost in the next tier of elite, and obviously the ones at the bottom are nearly in the other one. Those are the debatable ones. I feel like BBL fits quite comfortably in that tier now. But yeah, Spain second is certainly one that's debatable. I've had pretty conflicting opinions on that one, so it's difficult to have a consensus. Italy second seems to sit quite comfortably with BBL as things stand. I think Holland, that sits about right. Germany second, probably, yeah. But yeah, obviously, as I say, all of these are debatable. There's no way to absolutely quantify it.
So it's certainly moving in the right direction. When you compare, the BBL size, we'll talk about that and then we'll look at some of the overseas ones. But BBL, WBBL, obviously there's this great, for those who don't, there's this great database. And when I say great, it is phenomenal. It's called Synergy, and there's a couple of different other statistical programs that are available. But if you go on there, it not only does it have clips and games of every single league known to mankind, but it has the stats and the advanced stats and every single statistical breakdown you could possibly want. It is phenomenal. Is the basketball geek's dreamland. And we don't see this as much. I mean, NBA, you can go to nba.com/stats, you get the full works. It's all there. How do you get that? I mean, I find it sometimes difficult. A lot of it's squirreled away in the great Dan Routledge's laptop. But how do you get these stats or find ways to generate this that you get insights into BBL that mere mortals can't get?
Yeah, I mean, say I've got access to the same stats as everybody else. It's just kind of what I do with them in terms of, it's all my own formulas, it's all my own kind of algorithms and analysis. So I don't use anything like Synergy or anything like that. Certainly if I wanted to look deeper into an individual player, if I was a recruiter, say, or scouting an opposition, I'd certainly go to town on Synergy. I think there's some, really exciting data on there. I guess from my perspective, the one thing that's really interesting about things like Synergy, and the one thing I think we've never really solved in basketball, is whenever we're looking at anything statistically, it tells me nothing about what you are as a player defensively. I don't buy that sort of defensive rebounds, steals and blocks represent good defense. Sometimes you can be a freak athlete and get a bunch of steals, blocks and rebounds, and be a terrible man, individual and team defender. You just don't have some of the IQ or the understanding of the system or whatever else, or the commitment to that end of the game. So that's always the one that I'm very, very conscious is a big gap, particularly in the recruitment market, that stats can't tell you who's a good defender. So Synergy does a bit of that. Certainly the NBA's trying to do it, but I've never personally seen anything that, when you look at the numbers and you look at, subjectively what you've seen with your own eyes, they never seem to quite match. So yeah, I still think that's something basketball needs to solve somehow. I think the one that's been the most interest to me that I've seen over the years is I think you can look at the difference in field goal percentage of all the opponents that player's guarded. If you've seen that one before now, that's quite an intriguing one. I think it's based on sort of proximity. If you're the nearest player to the player takes a shot, you count as his defender for that play.
But the advantage the NBA have, obviously, is there's tracking cameras, and there's a lot more of it. And they've got chip cameras sometimes, and to gather some of that. How much do you think a league like the BBL, and to be honest, even the ACB, which has good stats, but they're not NBA level, would benefit from this? And there's so much in talk at the moment about improving consumer experience and user experience. I mean, for you as a fan, first and foremost, how do you use this? If you're watching a game, maybe on Sky on a Friday night, and you've got your database, how does this complement and enhance and turbocharge your viewing of a game? And what's the ways that you use it?
For me, primarily, it's deciding which games I want to watch. So I'm going to look at the stats in the BBL every season, because obviously the rosters are very different. With the NBA, I kind of know who's going to be, might move around teams, but I know the vast majority of the players because obviously they stay in the league for a long time, and all the stars are the stars. They're not going to go any higher because the NBA is the top level. Whereas obviously BBL, with your MVP top player, that is the likelihood you're going to move on to another league and get some more money. So for me, it's identifying as early as possible, well, who are going to be the top British players this year, and let's make sure I make some time to watch those games so I can match what the stats are telling me to my own eye test and get a feel for their playing style and whether I like their game, and maybe they can play at a different level, maybe going to make the next GB squad. That's the kind of stuff that excites me. But I kind of use the stats as almost like a shortlist of who I want to watch, as opposed to picking a random game or watching a team that majority plays imports, which wouldn't be of too much interest to me personally.
How would you go about? I mean, this is slightly off your database, but how do you go about, maybe even just for fun, comparing Sam Decker NBA against Sam Decker BBL? Is that possible in terms of stats?
Yeah, so if we touch on my rating system later on, that gives us the ability to see what their rating is for every season of their career and how that rating evolves. Obviously, the higher level you play, the easier it is to get a higher rating, because the threshold is almost lower because it recognises the level that you're playing at. But at the same time, if you absolutely dominate a lower league, then your numbers and your win percentage is likely to be very high as well. So it gives everyone the opportunity to reach the highest star rating they possibly can, based on the sort of performance tiers, as I call them, which we'll touch on.
So let's look at sort of our overseas contingent, because you do a lot of, it's amazing work, and credit to you for tracking a lot of these players. I mean, some of them who haven't even been on the radar in this country, and you've got them there. So we're midway through the season, more or less, at this point in time. Explain the system that you've got to track those, rank those, male and female as well. We should underline, to compare and to record and to kind of really follow the careers of these young talents.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hardest task of my database, is figuring out where everyone is at the start of the season and trying to keep up with all the off-season movements. Obviously, we're not just talking the domestic leagues where you're going to get a whole new influx of imports that I've got to create a brand new profile for because they've not been in the game in this country before. And then, all the young players who might be going to college, maybe going to high school. Trying to keep on top of where everyone is a gigantic challenge that eats up a whole lot of my summer. But once I've got everyone placed, then obviously it's just a case of keeping on top of the stats and getting those stats updates in. So the website is always current, and then sort of in the background turning those stats into my sort of custom evaluation. So I then know, essentially it's kind of identifying who deserves the content and the coverage is what I've always strived to do, because you can't cover everyone. I can't be spending every night being awake till 1 a.m. trying to cover every single player just to be nice. It's the case of who are the top players that really deserve that coverage and recognition. And I feel like it's so important for the overseas and college players as well, because if you think about what British basketball Twitter looks like, we can probably name 5 Twitter platforms that cover the BBL, WBBL, NBL, the domestic leagues. There's a lot of coverage and content around. But when you start to think outside of that and who covers overseas and college, you're pretty much talking Hoops Fix and me. I think probably BBL Fix does a little bit as well, but they're not in front of us, so it's not as easy to cover them. Sometimes you feel like when you put in that stuff out there, there's not the same audience for it, because I guess the majority of sort of casual basketball fans, if you like, as opposed to sort of British basketball community people who are heavily involved in the game and know everything that's going on. Talk about basketball fans, they're predominantly going to be a fan of a specific team, and the league that team plays in, they might follow a little bit. But you see sort of conversations sometimes when a GB squad is announced, and they're like, well, why isn't this BBL player in the squad? And there's maybe not that understanding of the level that these players are playing at and what that means. And that's what I strive to try and sort of tackle with the star rating system. That, okay, 10 points and 5 rebounds in the top division in France might not sound very sexy, but once you appreciate the level of that, and it's a star rating, so you can clearly say, oh, he's a 4-star, whereas this BBL player is only a 3-star, it might help that sort of education of the British basketball sort of fan base.
So here we are at this point of the year. I mean, let's look at the pros. Let's start with males. I mean, we have guys playing in good leagues. We've got Miles Hesson playing in Japan. We've got guys in Germany or in Spain. Where's our top guys, and how do you decide with the system that's the top of the charts?
Yeah, so they get a sort of DOB score, Dave Owen basketball score, and then based on that score, the score sits within a range, and then the range relates to a star rating dependent on the level of basketball they're playing at. So it's quite well, it's not quite, it's very, very complicated. There's a lot of maths that goes into it, but what it produces at the end of it is a star rating that everyone can sort of understand if they see the sort of matrix that shows what it relates to. Because the key thing for me is, okay, so we know the standard of the competition you're playing from the competition tiers, but then the sort of breakthrough that I had is understanding that within any league, I've identified 6 what I call performance tiers within that, and that's almost your role within the league. So not your role on your specific team, because every team has what they might call a star. Doesn't mean they're a star in terms of the overall league, if that makes sense. So sort of how I've defined it is, you've got superstars, you've got stars, you've got standouts, and then you've got performers, contributors, and non-contributors. So essentially every tier of basketball has those 6 performance tiers within it, and then there's a score range that relates to those. So it's probably hard for people to understand without a kind of visual representation, to be honest with you. It's not the easiest thing to explain with words, but it's proven to be very, very effective. I've done several sort of subjective versus objective tests where I'll get a sort of credible coach on a Zoom call and say, right, you tell me a player that you know inside out. I'll show them the ratings and what those ratings mean in terms of levels and performance, and say, okay, what rating do you think they are subjectively? Okay, and then we'll look at every season of their career, and every season will have a rating, and then we see how they compare, and it's been basically spot on every single time. So I'm becoming pretty confident in the credibility of an automated, purely maths-based rating.
Who are shining stars? When you stand back from the names and you look at performances, when you're going through this, who's the guys that are repping UK ball overseas in a big way?
So Gabe Owen is the real kind of standout guy this season. So in terms of his performances in Europe in the Basketball Champions League, he comes out as a 5-star, which is obviously pretty rare air for British players. And to put that into context, a 5-star player, if you just give me 2 seconds to make sure I'm being accurate here. So a 5-star would be, on my matrix, would say that they could be a performer in the Euro League, which could mean they could also be a non-contributor in the NBA. So they could get an NBA contract, but they wouldn't likely be a contributor. And then they would also be a Euro Cup or Champions League standout, which is exactly what Gabe is this season. So he's earned that 5-star by way of his performances there. But obviously, if you're a standout at a level, that suggests that you could step up and be a performer at the next level, and maybe a contributor at the next level after that, if the next level isn't the NBA, which is a little bit of a bigger jump.
I mean, Gabe's obviously someone we all know. You looked on some of the players who are playing overseas. I mean, I'm just looking at your list. If you had not come across before, is there someone there that we've all kind of overlooked? Maybe a name that overseas quietly, and they're somewhere maybe not on the beaten track that is doing something quite interesting.
I think, if we just look at the kind of players that are playing in Europe this season, probably Dean Williams is the name that's probably a little bit overlooked, I think.
He's playing in Germany and with Bonn, which is it's a great club. Yeah.
So he's I'd say he's probably a contributor in terms of sort of his role with the team. He's playing sort of 15 minutes a game. He's stepped up, to very high level basketball. He's shown that he can contribute at that level, but the interesting thing with the way I define those sort of performance tiers, roles, whatever you want to call them, is it kind of highlights the decision making that goes into professional basketball. So you can say, okay, I could be a performer at this level, so I know I'm going to have a good role. I'm going to be playing basketball. I'm going to be heavily involved. I'm performing at the level I should be, so I'm going to be earning decent money. But the decision making comes in as, well, do I want to step up a tier? Well, I'm going to drop from performer to contributor, so I'm going to play a little less basketball, but probably earn a little bit more money because I've moved up. Or maybe I want to drop down a level and move from performer to standout. So now I'm getting a bit more sort of coverage, exposure. My ego feels good because I'm one of the better players in the league. But maybe I'm earning a little bit less money because, again, I stepped down a tier. So when you put it into that context, it's quite an insight into, that when you've got several contract offers, the decision making that goes into it.
With the women, I mean, the name we always kind of look at is Temi Bentley is playing this year for Prague. Is she your standout woman, or is there someone else there that's really shining?
Temi's a tricky one this season because she's had a split year, so her sort of sample size hasn't hit my minimum yet. But I don't think we need to look at numbers to know how good Temi is. She's at that stage of her career where she's beyond proven. We can look at the history of her career and see the sort of numbers that she's put up and indeed the ratings that she's had. But yeah, as soon as she sort of hit that threshold, then I think we know we're going to see some pretty good numbers. I've just glanced at her sort of ratings over her career overseas, and there's a whole lot of 5 stars in there, which will be to the surprise of no one.
What about the women that we've got in college in the States? Because there's 60 of them that you've got listed. Again, some names I've not come across, some names that we've got big hopes for. Who's and it's such a diverse group because you've got Division 1, you've got Division 2, you've got Duke Junior College, you've got NAIA, which is a bit random at times in terms of the quality of it. I mean, it must be a nightmare to try and compare some of those.
Yeah. I had a name you'll probably be familiar with. Billy Mims was extremely helpful in looking through the conferences of American basketball and understanding how I can place these into tiers. And it's something that has been really interesting actually, because I feel like there's a lot of people that just immediately overlook Division 2 and say, well, it's not Division 1, so I won't recruit from there. But I think what this rating system highlights is that if you essentially outperform that level, then that puts you on a par with Division 1 players. Particularly, a high Division 2 conference is the same as a low Division 1 conference. I place them in the same tier because they're comparable. So I'm hoping that this rating system can shine a light on players that maybe play in a little lower level. But as soon as you start looking at ratings and say, well, here's a list of every 4-star rated player in college, if there's a couple of D2 names on there, a recruiter is worth a look, isn't it? You wouldn't dismiss them. You'd have a quick look at them, and then maybe it opens the door for some players to get opportunities they normally wouldn't.
And pick one out. Who's again flying the flag amongst the women for us this year?
So there's a very clear standout in terms of women in college basketball. Savannah Wilkinson is projecting with the college players. Obviously, they're not pros past the age of 25, so it's more of a projected ceiling. So the level we think, the rating and the level we think they could reach sort of post 25. Obviously, with college now, with COVID and extra super senior years and red shirts and everything, sometimes you're 25 when you leave college, seemingly now. But yeah, Savannah Wilkinson's a 4.5 star. So that's a very high sort of ceiling to become with. So we hope to see her playing at some high level Europe.
Yeah, Savannah, who this year's doing I guess we'd call it an extra year of college after graduating from Florida at the Southern Methodist University. So 5th year effectively for her, and she's 24. And Savannah's, I guess this will be it this year. She'll be into the pros finally next year, and we'll hopefully get her back in Europe. Let's look at the men's ranks amongst the collegians. I mean, the game is again so diverse, so very different depending on where you're playing or the league. I mean, it's like some conferences are strong, some conferences are not so strong. I mean, the player we're all kind of looking at is Cam Hildreth, and you've listed him slightly separately here. As I don't know if this is your kind of superstar tier, but it's, Division 1 high major, because he's at Wake Forest, which is a great school. Is he as good as we hope he is?
Okay, so what will be really interesting here, because I've done this rating system for the entire history of all British basketball players in college, so I can tell you his rating for this season, but then I can also tell you every other player that's achieved that sort of potential ceiling on their college career. Okay, so Cam is a 5-star player this based on what he's done this season, which, as I say, is extremely rare. And we'll have a quick look at the other players that reach that sort of criteria.
And we look at Cam stats when you're looking at there this year, 12 points per game, which, is huge. 6 rebounds, killing it, quite frankly.
Yes, and I think you'll have heard of the names that have achieved 5-star status or higher: Steve Bucknell, John Amici, Robert Archibald, Luol Deng, Cavell Bigby-Williams.
So very
when you're thinking about
group.
when you think about what those players did and what Cam can potentially do, it's super exciting to see a 5-star player currently playing in college. And bearing in mind he's only a sophomore as well, so what he could be doing in his senior year, unless maybe goes into the draft early, who knows.
What about the other guys? I mean, some of them, people like Tosin Avoban at Princeton.
Yes.
Again, we saw him in London just before Christmas. A player people are raving about. There's a few other guys like that are coming towards the end of their careers and have had nice, solid collegiate careers. Who's our kind of unsung heroes that we should be looking at?
Yeah, as I say, you've got some other players that are very highly rated. Dan Aiken is one. Straight away, Tosan, you've mentioned. Matt Marsh, Cam's teammate at Wake Forest. Amari Williams. So those are all your D1 kids, but I think it's really important to shine a light on 3 names in Division 2 that you say might be overlooked a little bit. Being introduced, Sesan Russell especially is a special talent. He's earned a 4.5-star rating from Division 2. And his DOB score is the highest range that you can do. So the way the scoring ranges work, because it's based on efficiency and win percentage predominantly, it's the same scale no matter what level of basketball you're playing at, because obviously your efficiency and win percentage are the same, whether it's junior, senior, whatever, it's the same scale. So his score is something I'm not used to seeing, basically. It's pretty special. And I'm hoping that the fact that he played D2 doesn't mean people sleep on him, and he gets the sort of opportunity that he should do once he leaves college in the summer. Yeah,
one of Billy Mims's Florida Tech contingent, and he's always nudging me about these performances, and it's impressive to see. With some of these players, I mean, you'll track them and you see them and you go through, and obviously some of them you'll see in EABL or MBL as they're coming through. Mm-hmm. Do you normally, and this is a big picture one, do you sense that when guys leave here, having played juniors in the UK, and then they go straight to college, so let's excuse the ones that go to high school, that they stay on a similar trajectory that we're expecting, or do they dip off? And what's our sort of, I know you're not comparing this maybe against other countries, but what's that trajectory like? Does it generally go as you'd expect? Is it straight line, or do we send guys to the States who struggle or overachieve?
Yeah, it's definitely a mixed bag. I think, to me, I look at, I take away all the stats and I say, okay, let's think about talent identification. Were they selected for GB? Hoops Fix All-Star Classic, Den Camp when that was running. Have they got anything on their sort of CV, if you like, that identifies them as clearly being amongst the better junior players in the country? So that's not looking at stats. That's a fairly easy way to identify talent. And generally speaking, the players that sort of hit those marks and get those selections tend to be, reasonably successful. Where you sometimes see players struggle is the ones that are not sort of within that talent identification one, but maybe put up really big numbers in junior, and then it's difficult, isn't it, to explain to a young player that just because you're putting up really good numbers in a junior competition doesn't necessarily mean that's going to translate to the next level. If you're not also playing men's Division 1, men's Division 2, and also standing out at that level and putting up good numbers, then it might be difficult for you at the next level.
How do you find the appreciation? Guys like me appreciate you. We really do. The players, do you get the players, getting in touch, maybe even hitting you up and saying, I've had a big game. Can you update your stats on me? I mean, do you feel that, people are within the game are noticing this, deservedly noticing this?
It's always been very, very difficult to gauge the impact of what I do. The one that I've mentioned on the podcast before, because it will always stay in my mind, is Caleb Fuller.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that name? So he came through the Ipswich program, and then went on to play Division 1. He's in his senior year, doing really well at Montana State with Chris Haslam and the gang there. When he sort of signed his scholarship offer, he sent me a private message, just saying, basically the fact that he had used his profile on my website as a link to send to all the coaches that he was emailing, because he knew the stats would always be up to date and he wouldn't have to constantly send a new email with the latest stats and everything like that. So he used it as a really sort of valuable resource. It helped him get recruited and he was very grateful for that. So that was a real sort of moment for me that it's like, I actually did have a part to play in a kid's recruitment to a Division 1 school. That was a really big moment for me. Generally when I have to contact a lot of players to basically say, where are you playing this year? If I can't find out online, sometimes I have to ask. Sometimes I need to know, if they've changed their agent, they've got any new highlights, all the sort of variables, if you like, in the database. Generally, when I'm speaking to people and asking them, they'll take that opportunity to sort of show their appreciation for what I do. So, yeah, it's a funny one. There's certainly moments when, I've put in 20 hours in a week and I think, is this making a difference? Should I be investing my time in this? And sort of probably overstretching myself a little bit in terms of everything I fit into my week.
Do you see the next evolution in this of at some point? Let's throw something. Let's say the riches of 777 wanted to create a director of stats for the BBL, and they had £1 million budget hanging there waiting for you in the office. What's the next stage in this evolution?
I think the rating system that I developed, that's sort of what I'm seeing as my ticket to maybe make a real difference in basketball and bring in the kind of money where I can sort of live a nice lifestyle, but then also give money back to British basketball and look at investing to raise the game up. Because I think I always talk about the kind of ecosystem of British basketball, in that if we put it in really simplistic terms, effectively the money that comes into British basketball is fans paying to watch basketball, right? If we're putting it in its most simplistic terms and ignoring all the sort of government funding aspect and all that kind of side of things, we're just talking about the ecosystem in terms of clubs and leagues. Effectively, fans pay to watch basketball. Now, the majority of that money is going to go on imports, because that's the nature of our leagues, the nature of leagues in Europe. We're not alone in that. The Americans are the stars. They come in and they get the money. But the majority of them are not going to stay in the BBL. They're going to move on. So it's almost like, if the majority of the money coming in is going to go straight back out, are we just going to be in this sort of constant circle where we never really move forward? And obviously 777, the money that's coming in there is a game changer in terms of changing the infrastructure and improving the levels. But what I'm hoping for with the rating system is that I can sell this rating service outside of the UK. So all of the pro teams and college teams that want to recruit talent, they've got an objective rating system to help them produce a sort of instant shortlist. And then obviously, I'm not suggesting anyone would ever commit to a professional contract or a scholarship based purely on numbers, but it gives you a shortlist to then do your subjective assessment, and it saves you wasting time on players that are maybe not at the level, but you having to put all that time watching and researching, because the only way you can find that out is by putting that time in. So it's basically a time saver and a sort of automated shortlist, if you like. If you know the level you're looking at, you can say, okay, Dave, I need 3.5-star player, forwards, shoots over 40% from three, I can say, okay, cool, here's like 70 players that fit that criteria. You can narrow it down from there.
Well, it is an amazing database. It is an amazing job that you do. I hope you get rich for it. We all hope you get rich for it. But then we all hope we get rich, and we've been disappointed so far. But there's always hope. You can find Dave's website. I highly recommend it. daveowenbasketball.co.uk. Keep doing what you're doing, Dave. Thank you so much for it, and thanks for joining us on the MVP cast.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to speak about what I do. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Dave. That is it for this edition. Don't forget you can get all our previous editions via your preferred podcast provider, or you can go to mvp247.com. We've got lots of them there. Or you can ask your smart device. Maybe you got one for Christmas. Ask it to play the MVP cast and you'll get it there. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter, you can get me at Mark Brookpole. Another edition of the podcast coming very, very soon. But for me, Mark Woods, thank you so much as always for tuning in. We'll see you again next time.